Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And typically joining me today would be the mayor, the governor of the great state of Texas, Mr. Michael Becker. Unfortunately, he is on another due diligence assignment. By the way, he is on a real due diligence assignment today. So he could not join us in the podcast. So joining us in the podcast, one of the top loan officers for Old Capital, Mr. Ricardo Hinojosa. Ricardo, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So I have noticed that, I don't know if there's a second wave coming, Ricardo, with this COVID, because in our side of the town, we were just told, I think today, that it's going to be mandatory for everybody to wear masks starting soon, walking into the buildings, walking into restaurants, walking down the street, that there's a fine that if you don't wear a mask. I think it's just because we've had a spike up in the number of people that have been tested positive with coronavirus. What's going on in your world about that? What do you know about that, Ricardo?
Well, I'm seeing the same thing. I mean, I'm on the other side of town from you, but the office that I'm in sent out a memo yesterday. Masks are required now. I think everybody's just being cautious, and we don't want to be where we were a month or two ago, where we're all on lockdown. So hopefully we can mitigate some of the spikes and manage things over the next couple of months and get through this without having to lock things down again, because that is not good for any of us.
So Ricardo is an interesting kind of a combination, because not only is he a loan officer for Old Capital, and again, one of our top producers, but he has just absolute knowledge about what's going on with multifamily, with management, because he and his partner own several hundred thousands of units, Ricardo. So tell me a little bit about, in your perspective as an owner of real estate, what are you seeing right now in terms of occupancy and collections for going into July?
So our numbers have been pretty good. My business partner and I, we have 4 assets, actually 5 assets. We're about to sell one, but 4 assets, about 1,300 units. And across the portfolio, we've had a really good last couple of months from an occupancy perspective. I think, like everyone, we have probably about 2-3% higher in terms of delinquency and bad debt from folks that are kind of squatting in place, just kind of waiting things out. So folks that for whatever reason couldn't pay. So we obviously are working with everyone, working out payment plans. But then you have folks that unfortunately have taken advantage of the system and just kind of squatting in place for a few months, like everyone. So everyone's kind of going through the same thing. But collections have been relatively good, a lot better than where we thought they would be. To be honest, one of the biggest challenges we've had over the last couple of weeks has been staffing. And, when you think about it, we opened up offices probably 2-3 weeks ago. We're doing, a lot of the online stuff, virtual tours on site are only done by appointment only. But, employees are still, staff is still, they're concerned. Right, so they're there every day working with the team. We actually had a couple of on-site staff come down with COVID just over the past couple of days on 2 sites. So we've been kind of in scramble mode, disinfecting offices, closing a couple of offices. Fortunately, everybody's fine. I mean, the 2 individuals that have it are doing well. They've been going through, light flu symptoms, but, things like that are impacting the business. Fortunately, we've been working, pretty remotely over the past few months anyway. So it hasn't had a big impact on just day-to-day stuff yet. But, these are people that we're close to, that we have that are, part of the family that we have concerns about. So, it's I'm sure Mike's gone through some of that as well that we're going to talk through.
Yeah. So we're going to talk to a friend of ours that last time he was on the podcast was probably about 2-3 years ago. And he told a great story about, I think it was one of his first purchases, that he was the kind of the owner operator on that property. Well, he's gone out and bought a couple other assets, and we'll talk to him a little bit about that. But if you find value in some of the conversations that we have, do me a favor, give us a 5-star rating on iTunes or Stitcher. Maybe put a comment down there if you thought that we bring some value to you if you're an operator or an owner of multifamily properties. And don't forget to go on to the oldcapitalpodcast.com, oldcapitalpodcast.com, and download the 17-page white paper report on how to kind of see it as the kind of the blueprint structure on how to learn how to finance apartment buildings. And this is a report that Ricardo, James Zhang, Michael Becker, and myself, we wrote. I thought we did a great job in kind of laying it out for people who are just at the beginning stages of kind of understanding about what's going on with underwriting and multifamily, some of the things that you should be paying attention to. So kind of our internal white paper report. So I definitely think that you should download that, again, at oldcapitalpodcast.com, oldcapitalpodcast.com. So on the podcast today, as I said, a friend of mine who's always positive, Mr. Positive himself, Michael Spotts. Michael Spotts, how are you?
Hey, Paul, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
And Mr. Positive, he is in his corporate headquarters, and so we have him on a GoToMeeting call. So we're looking forward to listening to him and tell a little bit of his story, because I think it kind of pertains to you a little bit, the listener, about what can be done if you kind of put your mind to, if you want to make a move into multifamily, kind of listen to what Michael has done, and maybe you can just watch his roadmap and follow his roadmap to success. So I'm going to turn it over to Ricardo and Michael, and I'm going to let you guys start the conversation.
Michael, thanks for joining us. Always great to have you. Let's just start off. So Mike has been, for those of you that didn't listen to the podcast a couple of years ago, he's been in the real estate business for a while. Made the switch to multifamily several years ago and has done fantastic. But Mike, why don't we start by just talking about how you got started in real estate many, many years ago and how that transition took place?
Sure. Yeah, it has been a couple years now. Back in the day when I got out of college, back in '87, I actually bought a duplex, lived in one side, rented out the other. And surprisingly, that kind of got me hooked in it. So when you have somebody else paying your mortgage and still cash flowing on top of that, that really impacted me at an early age. So from that day, I went out and bought a couple other properties and continued on my W-2 career. So that really took me through, 09. I had a dozen properties, was working for a semiconductor company, and just really enjoyed life. But back when the downturn happened, I was 45 at the time, and the company was handing out packages because it was tough economic times. And luckily, because of the passive real estate income that I had, I was able to take the package and move to the next stage of my life. It really worked out well.
So from that point, was it just real estate after that, or did you find another job, or what?
No. My goal was always to retire at 50. So we had always made that plan. It just happened to happen a few years earlier. And luckily, because of real estate, I was in a position to retire. It was great cash flow, great income, and really just relaxed, enjoyed, played a lot of golf, took my motorcycle around the country, and just started getting a little bit bored, to be honest. When you're 45, there's not a lot of people who can come out and play.
Yeah, good stuff. So single family was primarily your business for about 20 years or so?
20 years.
Yeah, about 20 years. And then we met when you joined Lifestyles and started getting interested in the multifamily space. So talk about that transition, talk a little bit about the education process, and then we'll just jump right in to what you've been up to lately.
Sure. Yeah. Back in 2015, a buddy of mine called me and said, "Hey, I'm going to this seminar, thing called Lifestyles." And, I, being in sales and traveling, I had listened to Dell and Lifestyles for years. And I went, "Oh yeah, you bet. I'll definitely go." So we ended up going to the seminar, and I was hooked because I know the value of real estate, and I had always wanted to get into multifamily apartments and stuff like that. But I just didn't I didn't know how. I didn't know how to make that step. But after we went to this seminar, I was hooked. Loved it, went full steam ahead, jumped into it. And Lifestyles is an organization that it really focuses on teaching and mentoring and guiding. And because I had a real estate background, I understood the numbers really well. So getting into the program and getting hooked up with a mentor at that time really accelerated, and I was able to jump into the multifamily side.
Yeah. I remember one of our first discussions, and we talk about putting together a roadmap, right? So someone comes to us or goes to one of these mentor type of programs, and it's important to lay things out and to have some direction, because you had some experience, but you really wanted to jump into a new type of a business, new type of a real estate business. And I remember having the discussion, and we talked about your real estate portfolio, and then we talked about the game plan. And at that point, you were looking to liquidate some of your single family homes. And I remember a very specific game plan you had in place. And okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go liquidate this first batch of homes, and we're going to put that into the first multifamily deal. And here's a second batch, and here's how I'm planning to progress. And we spent a lot of time working that roadmap. And we'll talk about how that materialized. But the roadmaps work, because you're a great example of that.
Well, and that goes back to knowing your team or putting a team together. And thankfully, you are definitely part of my team. And Lifestyles is part of the team with the mentoring and the guidance. And it allows us to put a plan together. These are big deals, and you don't want to get into them. It's not like single family. Single family, anybody can do it. Not saying that anybody can do it really easy, but single families is easy. Multifamily, it's a team effort. Nobody can do this on their own. From start to finish, it's a team effort.
Yeah. We'll spend a little time talking about your first deal. Not a whole lot of time, because we spent some time, on the last podcast. But your first acquisition was in the beginning of 2017, correct?
Yeah, February 2017 is when we closed on it. Yeah, and that was Agave Villas, smaller property, 94 units in Irving, off of O'Connor. Still have it.
Pretty good size for a first acquisition.
It was a good learning size for me.
So just quick highlights of that deal. That was a stabilized asset, 1980s build. What were some of the unique aspects of that transaction? And then we'll move on to some of your newer deals.
Uniqueness, the previous owner, they went in and they did the outside, and then they did a couple of the units, improved the concept. So it was stabilized. The exteriors looked really good. So when we looked at the asset, we really looked at pumping value from the interiors. And that was really what we did. We jumped in pretty quick and started pushing the value through interior upgrades.
Yeah. Now,
I know we touched on it last time, but the one hesitation was, we closed on it in February and had a fire in March. So that kind of set us back a little bit. But after that, man, we went rolling right along. So it's a great asset for us, and we're real happy for it.
So for someone that's just learning about the multifamily business, Mike just didn't go buy the 94 units in Irving, Texas on his own, right? So he talked about his team. How many partners or investors did you have in that first deal?
Oh, I think we had about 28 or 30. So it was a small group. In Lifestyles, it's a closed organization, and we have a lot of investors that we get to know, and we build relationships that way. And luckily, I had about 28 or 30 people who wanted to partner with me on that asset, and still hanging in there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So that was the first step on that roadmap. And then, you upgraded operations, continued the interior program.
Yeah.
Remember, you added some yards to some of the units. And then you started looking for deal number 2, and that was the next year, correct?
Yeah, that one in October 2018, I think, is when we bought this one. This one was 152 units, also in Irving, right around the 183, 161 area. Nice asset. We love the location, close to DFW Airport. So It met a lot of the things that we liked, and it was also really close to our first asset, which we were able to scale, which is another thing that we love to do. Really helps with the financials.
So I know that you're self-managing now. Were you self-managing? I don't remember, since you acquired Agave, or did you start with third party and then switch over?
Yeah, because we had agency debt, it was a Fannie Mae loan. I didn't have the experience per se for Fannie. So we started off with a third party manager, and they did a great job. Legends, Robbie Burns, man, bar none, they are awesome. They did a great job. And a few months after that, I mean, the whole goal is to self-manage. I always have. We rolled into it, and we got the blessing from Fannie. So I started my management company and started building for the future.
So you mentioned your goal from the beginning was to self-manage. So
Yeah.
the using the third party was more of a transition. What did you see? I guess, what about your style, about the way you wanted to run the business? Why did, doing it yourself make more sense than leveraging third party? Because we get a big mix, right? I would say most of the deal sponsors that we speak with, I would say majority use third party, but you chose to go a little bit of a different route. Just walk us through that thought process.
Yeah, my corporate background, I've always managed people, I've always managed programs, organizations. So I'm real comfortable with that side. I think a lot of principals aren't comfortable with leading teams like that, and I have no problem with it. On top of that, I'm real comfortable with construction and anything to do with building and stuff like that. So that made me real comfortable. Plus being in control. I think the problem with being or having a third party management is now you're at an additional arm's length. And when things go wrong or they don't go in the direction that you want, well, now you got somebody else in between you. If you're in control and you are the management company, you have nobody to blame but yourself. But you also have that control. You can change on a dime. When you see something going wrong, you can make that fix right away. And that's what I like about it. I like being in control. And that's just
ultimate accountability, I guess.
It is. The buck stops here.
So talk a little bit more about Vanderbilt. So that was 152 units in Irving. You added to the scale. So now you're up to almost 250 units between the two. How does that, for someone looking to maybe do this on their own with self-management, talk about the benefits of scale and what that allowed you to accomplish across both assets within the same area of Irving, Texas.
Yeah, scaling is a huge part of the business. The problem with anything under 100 units, it's very challenging to get staff inside. The scale average is for 100 units, you need one person in, one person out. That means one manager in the office and one maintenance guy. The problem with that, it's really hard to get a maintenance guy because he knows he's there all alone. He's doing all the work, ACs, plumbing. It's only him. But when you scale and you get 150, 200, 250, 400, as you scale, you're more likely to get better quality maintenance and management because it opens it up. And I saw that early on. It was really tough with Agave because it was small. Once we got into Vanderbilt, that was a little bit bigger. So now we can go really 1.5 in and 1.5 out. And the benefit is with Agave being 2 miles down the road, we were able to share resources. So that was a huge benefit right off the bat.
Excellent. Anything specific you want to highlight about Vanderbilt in terms of the opportunities? You've owned that property now for a couple of years.
Yep.
A couple highlights there. It's kind of similar to Agave, wasn't it?
It's very much like Agave.
Yeah.
It was built in 80. The prior owner did a lot of the exteriors. They rebranded it. They proved the concept. They did several of the interiors. So it was very much like Agave. And that current owner, they did a great job with it. Great to work with too. I love them. But it was kind of rinse and repeat. I hate to say it, but it proved out to be great.
I certainly like that property, and we had done a couple loans on that property over a period of the last, say, 10 years or so. So we knew the seller quite well.
Great group.
We knew Mike, and we thought that was a good love connection between the two. So we were definitely thumbs up of having the seller who owned the property for a number of years maybe go to the next level, and then Mike come up to that level, and we're all trading places at the table. But you talk about building a portfolio that is fairly close. I mean, you're just a mile or two or three away from your properties, from property A versus property B versus property C. What do you think about these guys that maybe not that knowledgeable, but they say they live up in Seattle and they want to buy a property in, I don't know, Phoenix, and then they buy that property in Phoenix, and then they look and they want to buy a property in Tulsa, and they buy that property, then they have a property in Florida. How could you ever stay on top of a deal that you're so far away to manage? What's your feedback on that, Mike?
I'll be honest, I don't know if you can. I mean, especially with what's going on right now with COVID and the flying and all that stuff. But I don't know if you can. I mean, I'm looking at properties from San Antonio to Denton. Yeah, we've looked in Phoenix, but that's a different challenge. We've looked in Atlanta, we've looked in Jacksonville. But when we get to looking deeper in those assets, it adds complexity to it because of the distance. And then you're dealing with third-party management because my staff's not there. My staff is here. So I have a tough time, unless it's an incredible deal and it really financially makes sense. But it's hard for me. I haven't found. Let me just preface that by saying I haven't found that deal yet because of all the challenges.
Yeah, I would tell you that it's very difficult to find, or it's very difficult to activate your game plan when you're 400 miles away, 45 miles away, 4,000 miles away to try to be efficient, because it really comes down to, when you make money, it's really in the operations of the property itself, that the vendors that are supporting your business, everybody that's supplying your flooring, your cabinets, your cabinet pulls. You want to find exactly who is in that marketplace that's going to give you the best efficient service on the deal. And it's very difficult to build relationships like that as deep as, say, you have, Mike, with your vendors in so many different locations throughout the country, that you can win this game. I mean, right now we've had a huge amount of appreciation just because, multifamily has been the hot ticket for people to make money on. But in the future, it's really going to come down to how efficient you are in operating a property. So I would be very concerned when people are buying. I mean, I know let's say you live in Seattle, and Seattle's not the place that you want to go into, but I would just say that then make yourself a game plan that you find one market and become very efficient in that one market. So if you choose, let's say you choose Waco, Texas, as an example, you have to know everybody in Waco and start building your portfolio in Waco. Don't try to skip around the country and think that you're going to do the best job. The business is just not scalable to do it that way. So, I would encourage anybody that's thinking about getting the multifamily, pick one market, build your empire in one market, get good at that, build those relationships with the brokers as deep as you can, and then just concentrate your efforts in that one market. Show a good success. That will build another good success in your business. I want to move on to your last property that you just bought. And I think that's an interesting one, just because you've gone from, let's say, from 94 doors to 152. Now you're at 256.
Yeehaw.
Yeah, that becomes a big number. But what was interesting about that, when you guys were putting this deal together, and you didn't know this, and neither did we, but you closed, let's say, at the end of February of 2020, so not too terribly long ago, February 2020. And I kind of make the demarcation line when everyone kind of found out about coronavirus. It was is when Tom Hanks said he had coronavirus. And I think, prior to that, I don't think we were taking it that seriously. And after that, we definitely took it seriously and the impact it was going to have. So you buy this property and close on it February 2020. 14 days later, or 12 days later, Tom Hanks has the coronavirus announced, and now you got to operate a property. So God love you. Yeah.
Yeah, so we closed at the end of February, and 15 days later, we didn't even have we had our staff in place, but we had new staff and we didn't have all the operations down, and we're locking our doors. I mean, at that time, it was kind of like all of a sudden business stopped. I mean, we didn't even have our website set up, and everything is done online now, so traffic stopped. So all of a sudden, we didn't have our entire staff set up yet. We had no online presence, and damned if we're not having to lock the door because of coronavirus.
Let's kind of go through just the functionality of that and how that works, because you buy it on the 27th of February. You're starting to put the property in place. You notice up all the tenants that there's been a change of ownership. Do you put that on the doors of every unit? And then just at the beginning, the first month, starting in March, did they write, how many checks were written out to you and how many checks were written out to the prior ownership?
A lot of confusion.
Yeah.
So
that typically happens when we have a change of ownership.
Yeah.
And then it gets exacerbated because, then the office closed and everybody is used to be able to walk in and make a payment in the office. And now how do you make payments and how do you go online? So, talk with me just on that transition, about some of the highlights and then some of the lowlights in that transition.
Yeah, so that was definitely tough because the tenants didn't know who we were. The blessing was that because we had a couple other assets, we did have the capability of taking online payments. So honestly, that was a lifesaver. But until we got the tenants comfortable with us, everything was done over the phone or internet. I mean, you think about it, even through that process, we couldn't go into the units. We couldn't go into any of the units to do maintenance. We were doing emergency maintenance only. So it really was a tough transition. So
were you able to keep any of the prior ownership maintenance people with you? Did they stay on board or did they go away?
Well, it was actually, we were only able to keep a porter. Everybody else, management staff and maintenance staff, went with the old owners. And I don't blame them. The selling group, they're a big organization. They're a great company. So I don't blame them. We're just a little organization and they have no idea who we are or where we're coming from. And to go with the organization that sold us the asset, I don't blame them. We can't offer as much as they do.
So what did you do to give them a kind of a comfort level? Let's first talk about the tenants. I mean, office is not open. Do you have an online presence starting?
No.
Were you able to capture their email addresses in the website, or did you have to build everything new?
We built everything from scratch. And even it's kind of really strange because even the other two assets, we never really had a strong online presence. We never needed it. The assets were so good. The locations were so good. Most of our traffic, we had a lot of walk-up traffic. So we really never had an online presence.
So this property is how far away from your last asset? This is a property called, when we're talking about 256 doors, built in 1980. Good looking asset, pitch roof, individually HVAC'd. Property's called Silverton Apartments. Silverton, Silverton Apartments. It's a very clean, stabilized asset. And what you were going to be able to do, I think the game plan is that stabilized asset, you're going to try to continue to push rents like they had done on the property. And they owned that property for a while. They weren't just going in there to themselves to flip it. They actually put hard money into the deal and they were going to keep it for a while.
Yeah, and the prior owner, kudos to them. They did a great job. The asset looked great. It was in great condition. Again, it's rinse and repeat, but these guys were top notch in ownership. So they maintained it very well. So, and that's a blessing too. When we take over, a lot of times all the tenants, it's a flood. Here's all the deferred maintenance. Here's what they didn't do. But we didn't have that. Luckily, the prior owner really maintained this asset very well. So COVID, the shutdown, the condition of this asset was a total blessing.
So I'm seeing a little bit of a pattern with you. Is you're buying properties that are stabilized, they already have cash flow. And the Agave Villas, that was a stabilized asset. And you've owned that property for 3 years, and it's probably done fairly well through this COVID deal. Same thing with the Vanderbilt Apartments, and now this property, stabilized, good-looking asset. A lot of the money had already been put in the property, so you're just kind of taking the deal over and trying to push it up to the next level of rents and kind of building a better sense of a community on that property with in-house management like you do. And I think you've done a great job in the last couple of months. I've kind of followed the story. So take us a little bit around the employees. How many are of a 256 unit property? How many people are inside managing the property, and how many are on the outside maintaining the property?
So because of the condition of this asset, we have been very lucky. And now with our online presence, on something like this, it would typically be 2.5 in, 2.5 out. But we have 2 in because of our online presence. A lot of people can go online and apply, and they can do virtual tours and stuff like that. So that has helped reduce the need for an additional full third person. Outside, we have 2 very strong maintenance guys and 1 porter. And definitely able to contain or take care of everything that's needed right now.
And then I'm going to let Ricardo get back to this, because I always like asking the questions. Tell me a little bit about, from the period of time since Tom Hanks had gotten coronavirus to today, how has occupancy and collections been on a property that you just took over that, like anything, was very confusing at the beginning, and now you got a little bit more of the picture of what this property is going to be able to do. Have you been able to raise rents or keep rents the same? Tell me a little bit about collections and occupancy.
Yeah, so overall, it's very much how Ricardo indicated his assets are doing across our portfolio. I have the 3, and then we also managed a few others. But for Silverton, very similar. When we took over, occupancy was around 96, I think. Because of all the rough transition, we went down to about 93, 94. Collections overall has been better than we expected, a lot better than we expected, to be honest, with all the bumps and bruises that we went through. Again, like Ricardo said, we do have a couple people that are taking advantage of the situation. We know they're out working, but they choose not to pay their rents. And this has been since March, April, and it's taking a hit. And the CARES Act, I think, is helping. I mean, our workforce, a lot of people have been affected, and that's justifiable. Luckily, they are getting a huge amount from unemployment, 600 a week plus Texas unemployment. So a lot of people, unfortunately, too, are making more than they did at their jobs and are still there. And that's something else that happened with all this shutdown of all the businesses, the airport. Wow, now everybody is home all the time. So your water usage goes up, your costs go up, your maintenance goes up at the other properties for sure. But it's just the impact of people staying at home.
Hey, Mike, you talked earlier about having to ramp up your online presence, and you and I talked about this specifically. Yeah. I think last week we were having a discussion about how you had to really pivot quickly because you had just taken over this asset. You didn't have a huge online presence because you just didn't need it in the past.
Yep.
But you did. You networked, and you got some. I think you got some feedback from some other Lifestyles members that were using certain services to push the online presence. Talk about what you did. You had to do it quickly, and it sounds like it's worked out for you pretty well.
Yeah, it's worked out incredible. Yeah, a lot of it is, like I say, going from 0 online presence. So we were scurrying. So I reached out to several other principals and really find out what has been successful in the past. So I reached out to several other companies. There's a couple companies out there that will really build the website, help out with Facebook, help out with Google. So we just reached out, and it's a marketing plan. So we had all new for all the properties, not just Silverton. We had all new websites built for all the properties. We have 360 virtual tours now. Everything application-wise can be done online. So it was a huge push. I mean, they ramped up. Luckily, I told them the severity of it, and the company that I reached out to, they were able to get everything online within 3 to 4 weeks.
Right. If somebody wanted to take a look at that website, what is the name of the website just on the Silverton apartments?
SilvertonIrving.com.
SilvertonIrving, IRVING.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mike, you talked a little bit about your situation about being in the high technology business, and then you wanted to kind of use your real estate, a little bit of a real estate background, and now you're sitting maybe in the mid 50s or so, about my age or so, or a little younger. I hate to say that, but that's true.
I'm there. Thank you.
Yeah. So people that are, maybe looking back, people that are actually, in the high technology business, or they're in something else that they're not really in charge of their life, what does that look like for you? Was this a good move to get into what you're doing, and would you recommend it for somebody else?
Absolutely. I absolutely love it. This is a way to control your life, to stay engaged, and really to make what you want out of it. I love this. I've been doing the real estate for so long, and the benefit now is, look, my kids have been around real estate all their lives. They didn't care about it. They know nothing about it. But now that I'm in an organization like Lifestyles, I'm a mentor with Lifestyles too, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I have the ability to not only progress and control my life, I have the ability to give back to the next generation that gives everybody, whether you're high tech, whether you're a software engineer, whatever your background is, this gives you the ability to control your own life.
Tell me a little bit more about, what's your typical day look like? I mean, you talked about being in control. So give me an idea of what you do, briefly, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, of what a day in the life of Mike Spots is all about.
So normally before COVID, it was really just checking on the assets, making sure the plans are being followed by all the staff. I'm lucky. Early on, my goal was to grow. I'd like to have 5, 7, 9 assets. So early on, I hired somebody with the skills of a regional. She's phenomenal, and she takes control. So her and I really talk a lot. And then on the mechanical side, the business, the construction side, I also have a project manager. So those two folks I hired early on, and they're working with me to build this process. So in the day of the life before was really communicating with those two, making sure that all the assets are doing what they need to, whether it's the rehab, whether it's collections, delinquencies, all that was fine. So that was the normal day back then. Wow, COVID hits, and now I'm dealing a lot with what happens if. Early on, like February, March, one of our assets had a COVID case in it. We didn't know what to do, so obviously we had to take care of that too. So really, we just locked down everything. And then the smaller properties that really had small offices, those were shut down. The bigger ones, those were opened up minimal. And when the COVID started getting worse, we just locked them down too. So the day in the life for COVID versus now with COVID, two totally separate things. When we get back to normalcy, what is this, the new normal? I don't know. But once we get back to that, then it goes back to, hey, how are the assets doing? Where are we in the CapEx? Moving forward, what's the next deal? And I'm always looking for the next asset to purchase. So that's my focus, because I have such an incredibly strong team working on the assets now.
Yeah, team is such an important piece. Is
Huge.
that, would you do this without having a team behind you?
You can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine whether your team is a third-party management or whatever your team, however you make up your team, you can't do this alone.
There's just too much money at risk to try to do it yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's a $30,000 or $300,000, if you're not talking to somebody that knows what the heck they're doing as a mentor or as an educator to try to get you to the next level, I think you're just kind of spinning your wheels. And so we're big believers of mentoring. Whether, if you're a dentist, I mean, you went to medical school, dental school to kind of understand how that's all about. If you're flying airplanes, you paid money to learn from a flight instructor. I mean, that's what you kind of have to do to get into this business. And now Mike has gotten to the position that, he's bought a number of assets. He's been successful at it, and now he's kind of given back within the Lifestyles umbrella, which is an interesting deal because they kind of want to have the guys that have been successful to come back and help the people that are kind of brand new and give them a map how to do it. And that's kind of an unusual role because somebody's helped you. Now they're putting it back onto you, Mike, and now you're going to have to help somebody else. What do you think about that?
Oh, God, I love it. This is right in my wheelhouse because of what I've done in my past with whether it's the management side, the real estate side, and thankfully for my team, being successful in the properties that we have had. We have had a lot of good success and we've had a lot of experiences, whether it's the fire, whether it's, you name it. But giving back to the next generation brings so much to me personally that I can't say enough about it. And I really thank Lifestyles for allowing me to do it, whether it's newbies just coming into this business, or luckily my kids are now trying to get into this business. So I get to mentor them through Lifestyles as well as personally. It's an incredible way to really go off to the sunset, I guess, as you say. Let's just say it's the next step in my life. I will do this forever, and I hope I can continue to give back moving forward.
That's fantastic. We actually had Lynn Morrow on the podcast about a month ago, and she spent quite a bit of time talking about the culture and how, and Lynn Morrow, if you haven't listened to that podcast, it's a great one. She actually runs Lifestyles Unlimited. She is the executive vice president, and she talked a lot about that culture, the give back culture, how we, they build you up and then they ask you to help others. But it's not just, you don't just take calls and answer questions. You actually, you're actually boots on the ground helping up and coming investors. Talk about the level of education and go into a little bit of detail about what you actually do. You're helping them analyze deals. You're helping them do due diligence. You're on site looking at these deals with them. Just give us some highlights about what that's like.
Yeah, it's start to finish. Once somebody goes through the education process to become, in Lifestyles, they're called leads. It's a sponsor or a principal. But in Lifestyles, they're called leads. And there's a program that they go through to get educated. You get all the basics, you understand what the process is in analyzing, financial analyzing, asset analyzing, and then you start looking for assets. Once these new leads start to find assets, we go with them and hold their hand and go through the financials, make sure it's financially viable. Once that check mark has been done, then we'll also walk properties with them and point out things that they should be looking at, as whether it's your CapEx, whether it's here's what needs to be fixed, you name it. That's we're there to hold their hand through the entire process, not only from the beginning analyzing it, through evaluating it, through putting in LOIs, through the close, everything. And then there's also within the organization, there's operations. There are hundreds of years of experience within this organization across the country that have done this all their lives. I've done it for over 30 years, but there are people that have done it for a lot longer than I have, and they've done the operation side, and they are there to help after the close. They have seen everything. So that's, as a mentor, I do the front end stuff, but there is somebody to hold your hand throughout the entire ownership of these assets.
And Ricardo, you may know this, but Mike is a mentor, probably just specifically because he lives in Dallas and he owns properties in the Dallas area. But they have mentors throughout the country. In Atlanta, in Florida, Phoenix, and Detroit. There's opportunities to work with mentors that are boots on the ground in some of these different areas that you may have an interest in on doing. So just a kind of a final question here, Mike, is that, again, looking back at your business that you've kind of built, I mean, worked your way up from, say, residential up to now multifamily stuff. Any words of wisdom or advice for somebody, that is just looking to get into this, and what would you coach them on, and what would be your advice?
Looking back over my career in this, my advice, and everybody says it, I should have done it earlier. I should have got into this earlier, because you can control your life. When you're working for somebody else, you're at somebody else's mercy. When you're in this business, you're at your own mercy. You get out of it what you put into it. Get into it early, control your situation, and control your life.
And then at what period of time can you think that you're making enough money to offset your income on the high technology? Was it the first building? Was it the first building and the second building? Was it the first building, second building, and the third building? At what period of time was it that you were able to substitute your income from what you were doing previously?
I was already out of it. I was already retired. So it was a little bit different for me, because I already had the passive income from all my rental houses. So whether it's somebody else, that's a good question. It depends on, in lifestyles, you're scaled. You can only get a deal the size of really what you can afford to help put in. You have to put in a portion of that, like your first deal, you have to put in 15% of the equity raise. So that governs a lot of what people go buy. Nobody's going to be able to go out and buy, 200, 300 units right out of the chute, unless they're very wealthy, but then they wouldn't be working anyhow.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I absolutely love about Lifestyles, is because they force the sponsor, the lead, the guarantor, the general partner, the guy who's the captain of the ship, like Mike is, to put their own money in the deal. I mean, if you were an investor, a passive investor just putting in, how would you like to talk with somebody that doesn't want to put any money into this deal? I mean, what type of tie do they have to make this deal successful? Lifestyles wants the deal to be successful, so they force the general partner, the lead, to put money into the deal. And so it's a lot, I would say, a little bit easier to raise money, I would say, with folks that, as a limited partner, that you see the leads putting money into the deal. Anything more to comment on that, Ricardo?
No, I think that's spot on. Me personally, and I'm looking at a passive deal, because I've invested passively as well, and I'm sure you guys have too. First question that always comes up: well, how much are you putting as a deal sponsor? How much are you putting in? You always want to make sure that the deal sponsor has skin in the game. Whether as a lender, we want it. Paul and I talk about it all the time, and as an investor, you want that as well.
Yeah, and one other comment on that too. How I guide people, and kind of how I guide people that are in my deals as well. Never invest any more in a deal than that lead sponsor has. Talk about skin in the game.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to be putting more money into the deal than that sponsor did. I'm
just so amazed at some of these groups that don't require cash to be put into the deals. And I think it's just not the right way to do it. I mean, I would never invest in a deal that the sponsor wasn't putting sufficient cash in, especially in the first couple of transactions. I mean, that's where you really want to make sure that the deal sponsor is committed to the transaction. And so I think Lifestyles and what you guys preach at Lifestyles is kind of the right way of doing it. So Mike Spotts, if there's somebody that wanted to get a hold of you and kind of learn a little bit more about what you do, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Reach out to me via email. It's mspotts, S-P-O-T-T-S, at greystoneprop.com. That's GREYSTONE, PROP, as in property.com.
Sounds great. Ricardo, what did I leave off that you want to have the final comment on? I'm going to give you the final words of wisdom to everybody.
Appreciate it, Paul. We talked about it at the beginning. One of the first times that I met Mike and sat down with him was that whole, the whole roadmap piece. So Paul, you brought up how if someone is listening to this and to try to figure out, hey, will this work for me? And one, can I get my freedom? Two, can I offset my income? Well, the way to do that is to sit down with someone that's done it before, understand how they did it, and put that roadmap together. So it's doable. I've seen People from all walks of life, from all backgrounds do it. Mike's helping people do it on a day-to-day basis. So, the first step is to reach out and to ask questions to folks that have actually done it.
Sounds great. Okay, so we'll wind this up. Michael Spotts, thanks for spending some time with us. We certainly do appreciate that. Ricardo Hinojosa, always enjoy your comments. He's the top producer for Old Capital, so reach out to Ricardo if you have any lending questions. He's there to help you out. Again, I'm Paul Peebles. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.